January 1st, 1923. 11:47 in the morning. Rosewood, Florida. Sarah Carrier stands on the porch of her 2-story wooden home. She's just finished preparing lunch for her family. The smell of cornbread and greens drifts from the kitchen. Her son Sylvester is out front mending the fence. Her 6-year-old granddaughter plays in the yard chasing chickens. The Cedar Key lumber train rolls past in the distance. The scent of fresh-cut pine from the Sumner sawmill hangs in the warm air. The church bell from the African Methodist Episcopal Church rings out across the town. Everything is normal. Everything is peaceful. But 3 miles east in Sumner, something is happening that will change everything. Fannie Taylor, 22 years old, married mother of 2, is screaming. I was attacked by a black man. Her floor is scuffed. Her face shows bruises. Neighbors rush to her door. But here's what they don't tell you. What they erased from every history book. Several neighbors saw a white man leaving Fannie's house through the back door that very morning. A white man she'd been seen with before. Sarah Carrier saw him too. So did her granddaughter Philomena Goins. So did Arnett Goins. They watched him run from Fannie's house heading toward the woods. They knew the truth. Fannie Taylor was covering up an affair. She was hiding adultery. And she was about to destroy an entire town to protect her secret. In the next 5 days, Rosewood will cease to exist. 120 black residents. Families who owned their land. Families who built their homes with their own hands. A church, a school, a Masonic lodge, businesses. All of it will be gone. Burned to ash, erased from maps. 30 to 40 people murdered. Men, women, children, shot on sight, burned alive, lynched. And for 70 years, this massacre was removed from Florida textbooks. Your grandmother's generation lived through this. Your great-grandparents could have been there, and they never taught it in school. Not one word, until now. This is the story they buried. This is your stolen throne. And by the time you finish this video, you'll understand why your family struggles today. You'll understand why the wealth gap exists. You'll understand why reparations aren't charity. They're payment for theft. This isn't ancient history. This is your inheritance. Stolen, burned, erased. And it's time to take it back. How does a white woman's lie erase an entire town from existence? How do 200 to 300 armed men attack a community? Murder dozens of people, burn every building to the ground, and not one single person gets arrested. Not one conviction. Not one trial. How does the state of Florida cover this up for 71 years? And why did it take until 1994 for anyone to acknowledge what happened? By the end of this video, you're going to know the answers. And these answers will change everything you thought you knew about American history. You'll discover the real reason Rosewood was destroyed. It wasn't about an assault. It wasn't about protecting white women. It was about land. It was about wealth. It was about black people who refused to bow down. Black people who owned property. Black people who were independent. And that independence threatened the entire system of white supremacy. You'll learn the names of the warriors who fought back. Sylvester Carrier, Sarah Carrier, Sam Carter, James Carrier. Men and women who stood their ground and killed 2 white attackers in self-defense. Your ancestors weren't helpless victims. They were soldiers defending their homes. You'll see how the Rosewood Compensation Law of 1994 became the first reparations law in American history. The first time a state government admitted what it did. The first time survivors received payment for stolen property. And you'll understand why this matters for every black family in America today. And here's what will shock you most. Rosewood wasn't unique. It wasn't an isolated incident. Between 1898 and 1923, at least 50 prosperous black towns across America were destroyed the exact same way. Tulsa, Wilmington, Elaine, Ocoee, Springfield, Atlanta, 50 towns, thousands of families, billions of dollars in stolen wealth. I'm going to show you how to calculate your stolen inheritance. If your family lived in any of these towns, I'll show you exactly how much was taken from you. Not symbolic, not metaphorical. Actual dollar amounts. This isn't ancient history. This is 1923. Your grandmother was alive. Your great-grandparents lived this. If they owned land in Rosewood, you would be wealthy today. Instead, they stole it. They burned it. They erased it. And you'll never see the wealth gap the same way again. You'll never see reparations debates the same way again. You'll never see Florida history the same way again. Because what they did to Rosewood, they did to you. Let's begin. Let me take you to Rosewood before they burned it down, before they erased it, before they tried to make you forget it ever existed. Rosewood sat in Levy County, Florida, right on the Cedar Key Railroad line. About 120 to 150 black residents called this place home. It wasn't a big town, it wasn't famous, but it was theirs. And that's what mattered. The economy ran on lumber. The Comer and Sons sawmill in nearby Sumner employed many Rosewood men. But unlike Sumner, which was predominantly white, Rosewood had something special. Black people owned the land, not sharecropping, not renting, owning. They had property deeds, legal ownership, generational wealth being built acre by acre. The Carrier family owned land. The Goins family owned land. The Bradley family. The Carter family. These weren't tenant farmers begging white landowners for scraps. These were property owners building equity that would pass to their children and grandchildren. They grew vegetables, raised chickens and hogs, hunted in the woods, worked the turpentine camps, built their own homes from timber they cut themselves, and they defended what was theirs with hunting rifles kept loaded by the door. Rosewood had infrastructure. The African Methodist Episcopal Church stood at the center of town. Services every Sunday, prayer meetings every Wednesday. That church held the community together. It was more than religion. It was identity. It was resistance. It was proof that black people could organize themselves without white supervision. The school taught black children to read and write when white schools wouldn't let them through the door. The Masonic Lodge provided fraternal bonds and mutual aid. The post office connected Rosewood to the wider world. The train station meant mobility. It meant commerce. It meant escape routes if needed. And they needed those escape routes. Because in January 1923, everything they built was about to be destroyed. Rosewood wasn't as wealthy as Tulsa's Black Wall Street. It didn't have millionaires and banks and luxury hotels, but it had something more dangerous to white supremacy. It had autonomy. Black people in Rosewood didn't depend on white employers for everything. They didn't bow and scrape. They didn't say yes, sir, and no, sir, with their eyes on the ground. They looked white people in the eye as equals. And when black people own land, when they educate their children, when they build wealth, when they refuse to bow, that's when white supremacy feels most threatened. Because the entire system depends on black inferiority. The entire economy depends on black labor being cheap and exploitable. The entire social order depends on black people knowing their place. Rosewood didn't know its place, and that's why they burned it down. New Year's Day, January 1st, 1923. 3 miles from Rosewood in the town of Sumner. Frances Taylor, everyone called her Fanny, 22 years old, married to James Taylor. He worked as a machinist at the Comer and Sons sawmill. They had 2 young children, a typical white working-class family in rural Florida. That morning, neighbors heard screaming coming from the Taylor house. They rushed over, found Fanny bruised and crying. The floor was scuffed up like there'd been a struggle, and Fanny was shouting the words that would doom Rosewood. A black man attacked me. Those 6 words. That's all it took. But here's what really happened. Sarah Carrier saw the truth. She was well known in both Rosewood and Sumner. People trusted her. She did laundry for white families. She knew what went on behind closed doors. And that morning, Sarah saw a white man leaving Fannie Taylor's house through the back door. Sarah's granddaughter Philomena Goins saw him too. So did Arnett Goins. Multiple witnesses. A white man sneaking out of Fannie's house while her husband was at work. And those witnesses told the black community what they saw. Sarah knew exactly what happened. Fannie had a lover, a white lover. They'd had an affair. That morning they fought. He hit her, hard enough to leave marks. Then he panicked and ran. And Fannie panicked too. Because if her husband found out about the affair, her life was over. Divorce, shame, poverty. She'd lose everything. So she made a choice. She blamed a black man. Any black man. It didn't matter who. The accusation alone would be enough. White men would rally to defend her honor. They'd hunt for the supposed attacker. And her secret would stay buried. She chose to destroy black lives rather than face the consequences of her own actions. And the system gave her that power. The system always gave white women that power. The power to point at any black man and say he attacked me, knowing the accusation meant death. Enter Jesse Hunter, a black prisoner who'd escaped from a chain gang nearby. He was somewhere in the area. Nobody knew where. There was zero evidence Jesse Hunter was anywhere near Sumner that morning. Zero evidence he'd ever seen Fannie Taylor. But he was black. He was free. He was nearby. That made him guilty. The white mob formed immediately. Fannie's husband, James, his co-workers from the sawmill, men from Sumner, men from neighboring towns. They brought bloodhounds, tracked a scent from Fannie's house. The dogs led them toward Rosewood. Notice the pattern here. Stop and think about this pattern because it repeated hundreds of times across American history. White woman lies. Black man accused. No evidence required. No investigation. No trial. Just immediate mob violence. And not just against the accused. Against the entire black community. Emmett Till in Mississippi, 1955. Carolyn Bryant lied. Emmett was murdered. Decades later, she admitted she made it up. Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. Sarah Page, white elevator operator, accused Dick Rowland of assault. Later, admitted nothing happened. But 300 black people died. 35 city blocks burned. Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. White newspapers printed false stories about black men threatening white women. 60 to 300 black people massacred. Rosewood, Florida, 1923. Fannie Taylor lied. And what happened next proves this wasn't about justice. This was about power. This was about terror. This was about keeping black people in their place through violence. And that violence began with a man named Sam Carter. Sam Carter was a blacksmith, 34 years old, skilled craftsman. He made his living repairing tools and shoeing horses. He also did carpentry work. He owned a horse and wagon that he used to transport lumber and supplies between Rosewood and Sumner. January 1923, the mob came for Sam. They accused him of helping Jesse Hunter escape. No evidence, no proof, just an accusation. They grabbed him, tied him up, spent hours torturing him, trying to force a confession, trying to make him say he'd hidden Jesse Hunter, trying to make him give up other black men's names. A deputy sheriff stood nearby during the torture. He heard Sam's screams. He watched. He did nothing. That's not incompetence. That's not cowardice. That's complicity. That's the state giving its approval to lynch mob violence. Sheriff Walker of Levy County was also present, the chief law enforcement officer of the county. He had the authority to stop this. He had the legal duty to protect Sam Carter. He had deputies and weapons. He could have arrested the mob. He did nothing. They tortured Sam Carter all day. Then they killed him. shot him multiple times, strung his body up on a tree as a warning, a message to every black person in Rosewood. This is what happens when you don't cooperate. This is what happens when you resist. This is what happens when you try to protect your own. Some mob members took pieces of Sam's clothing as souvenirs, trophies from a lynching. They'd go home and brag about it, show their friends and family, laugh about it. When the law watches a lynching and does nothing that's not chaos, that's not random violence, that's policy. That's the system working exactly as designed. The law isn't there to protect black people. The law is there to control black people. And when control requires murder, the law steps aside and lets murder happen. Sam Carter's death was January 2nd. He was the first casualty. But the massacre was just beginning. January 4th, 1923. Evening. Sylvester Carrier knew they were coming. Everyone in Rosewood knew. Sam Carter's body was still hanging from that tree. The mob was still hunting for Jesse Hunter, and they were blaming the entire black community for hiding him. Sylvester made a decision. He gathered his family at his mother Sarah's house, a large two-story wooden home, strong, defensible. He believed in safety in numbers. If they spread out in individual homes, the mob could pick them off one by one. Together, they could defend themselves. Let me tell you about Sylvester Carrier. This man was a World War I veteran. He'd served his country, fought for America in Europe, came home to Florida where he couldn't vote, couldn't eat in white restaurants, couldn't use white bathrooms, and faced lynch mobs. But he'd learned how to fight. He'd learned how to shoot. And he'd learned that sometimes you have to stand your ground or die trying. Sylvester was also a member of the Masonic Lodge, a community leader, a man other black men looked up to. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was defending his home, his mother, his family. He was doing what every American has the constitutional right to do. Inside Sarah Carrier's house that night, Sarah herself in her 50s, the matriarch, Sylvester and his wife Gertrude, his brother James. Carrier partially paralyzed from a stroke, but still determined to fight. His sister, Emma Carrier, with her children. Other relatives and neighbors seeking refuge, maybe 15 to 25 people total, including young children hidden upstairs under mattresses. Sylvester positioned rifles at the windows, loaded ammunition, gave instructions. If the mob comes, we defend this house. We have the right. This is our property. We've done nothing wrong. We will not be murdered without a fight. Around 20 to 30 white men approached the house that night. Armed with rifles and shotguns, they surrounded the property, called out for everyone to come out, demanded they surrender, accused them of hiding Jesse Hunter, who wasn't even there. The people inside refused to come out. They knew what happened to Sam Carter. They knew coming out meant death. The mob started shooting. Bullets tore through the wooden walls, and the people inside shot back. Minnie Lee Langley was 8 years old that night. Decades later, she remembered every detail. She said Sylvester put the gun over her shoulder to steady his aim. The mob kicked down the door. Sylvester let him have it, shot him dead in the doorway. Gunfire erupted from every window. The Carriers and their neighbors weren't just defending themselves. They were fighting back with precision, with purpose, with righteousness. 2 white men died that night. Henry Andrews, the sawmill superintendent. C.P. Wilkerson, known as Polly, a local businessman. Both shot dead by black residents defending their home. 4 to 6 other white men were wounded. The mob had expected easy victims. They expected black people to cower and beg for mercy. Instead, they met warriors who shot back and killed their attackers. Inside the house, casualties mounted too. Sylvester Carrier was shot and killed. His mother, Sarah Carrier, was shot and killed. They died defending their home. They died as soldiers. They died with honor. Reuben Mitchell lost an eye from a bullet. Emma Carrier was shot in the hand. Multiple people were wounded, but many survived. When the mob finally retreated, dragging their dead and wounded, the survivors made a desperate decision. Run. Hide in the swamps, because they knew the mob would return with reinforcements. And next time, there'd be no mercy. Men, women, and children fled into the cold, dark swamps surrounding Rosewood, still wearing their nightclothes, barefoot, carrying babies. The water was freezing. They hid in the marsh grass, stood in water up to their necks, ate roots and whatever they could find, drank swamp water, kept the children silent because any sound could bring the mob. They stayed hidden for 3 days. 3 days in the swamp, listening to gunfire, watching the smoke rise as their town burned. Friday, January 5th, 1923. The mob returned at dawn, came back to collect their dead from the Carrier house, and then they did what mobs always do. They made everyone pay. Not just the Carriers. Everyone. Every black person in Rosewood. The mob had grown. Now 200 to 300 armed white men. They came from surrounding counties. They came from Georgia. Some traveled over 100 miles to participate in the massacre. This wasn't spontaneous rage. This was organized racial terrorism. They set fire to the Carrier house first, watched it burn to the ground. Then they spread out through Rosewood, hunting, shooting any black person they saw. It didn't matter if you'd been at the Carrier house. Didn't matter if you knew Jesse Hunter. Didn't matter if you were a man, woman, or child. If you were black and in Rosewood, you were a target. Lexi Gordon was 50 years old, a widow, light-skinned. She was sick with typhoid fever, barely able to walk. She'd sent her children into the woods to hide. When the mob set fire to her house, she crawled out from under the porch where she'd been hiding. They shot her in the face with a shotgun, killed her instantly. How many others died that day? Official reports said 6 black people total. Survivors said 30 to 40. Some estimates go higher. We'll never know the true number because the mob didn't count, because authorities didn't investigate, because bodies were hidden in swamps and shallow graves and burned in buildings. The mob torched everything. 5 more houses, the church, the school, the Masonic Lodge, every black-owned building. They didn't touch John Wright's house because he was white. Everything else burned. Saturday, January 6th. The massacre continued. James Carrier Sylvester's brother, the one with partial paralysis. He emerged from the swamp desperate. Maybe seeking help. Maybe seeking food. He approached W.H. Pillsbury, a white sawmill supervisor. Begged for protection. Pillsbury locked James in a small house supposedly to keep him safe. But the mob found out. 25 to 30 white men burst in, dragged James out, took him to the black cemetery, made him dig his own grave while they tortured him, asked him questions about Jesse Hunter, about the Carrier house shootout, about anything they could use as an excuse. Then they shot him, dumped his body in the grave he'd just dug. James Carrier was murdered by a mob, while a white authority figure who promised protection did nothing. That's not tragedy. That's lynching with state approval. By Sunday, January 7th, Rosewood no longer existed. Every home destroyed. Every business burned. The church was ashes. The school was rubble. 120 to 150 residents scattered. Most fled by train to Gainesville. Some went to Jacksonville. Others spread across Florida and beyond. They never came back. Couldn't come back. There was nothing to come back to. Their property deeds meant nothing because there were no buildings left to claim. Their land was stolen or abandoned or seized by the county for unpaid taxes after they fled. The mob didn't just destroy buildings. They erased existence. They erased a community. They erased history. They erased your inheritance. And for 70 years, Florida pretended it never happened. Let me show you something that will change how you see American history forever. Rosewood wasn't unique. It wasn't a one-time tragedy. It wasn't an unfortunate incident that happened in one small town because of one lying woman and one escaped prisoner. Rosewood was part of a pattern, a system, a deliberate strategy of economic warfare against black communities across America. Between 1898 and 1923, white mobs destroyed at least 50 prosperous black towns. 50 towns, thousands of families, billions of dollars in wealth, erased, and every single one followed the same script. Black people built wealth, white mobs destroyed it. Authorities did nothing. Media blamed black victims. History books erased it. Let me walk you through the pattern so you can see it clearly. November 10th, 1898, 25 years before Rosewood. Wilmington was different from most southern towns. It had a black majority population. Black people owned businesses, held political office, served in government, voted, exercised power, and white supremacists couldn't tolerate it. After an election where black candidates won, white newspapers began printing lies. False stories about black men threatening white women. Inflammatory propaganda designed to whip up white rage. A white mob formed, armed, organized. They called it the Wilmington Insurrection. But that's a lie. Insurrection means the oppressed rising up against the powerful. This was the opposite. This was the powerful crushing the oppressed. The mob killed 60 to 300 black residents. The death toll varies because authorities never counted. They burned black businesses. They burned homes. They destroyed the printing press of the black newspaper. They forced every black elected official to resign at gunpoint. They installed white supremacist leadership. This was a coup, the only successful coup d'etat on American soil. They overthrew a democratically elected government and replaced it with white supremacy rule. And how do history books describe it? The Wilmington Race Riot. Not massacre, not coup, riot. As if black people started it. As if black people were the aggressors. That's how they erase truth. They control the language. May 31 and June 1st, 1921, 2 years before Rosewood, Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, the wealthiest black community in America. More millionaires per capita than Beverly Hills. Over 600 businesses, banks, hotels, theaters, hospitals, schools. Everything black people needed, they built themselves. Dick Rowland. A 19-year-old black shoe shiner rode an elevator operated by Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white woman. Something happened in that elevator. Maybe he tripped and grabbed her arm to steady himself. Maybe nothing happened at all. She screamed. He ran. The newspaper printed the accusation. Black man assaults white woman. By now you know this script. Within hours, a white mob formed. They surrounded the courthouse where Dick was being held. A group of armed black World War I veterans came to protect him from lynching. Shots were fired. The black men retreated to Greenwood to defend their community. What happened next was apocalyptic. The white mob attacked Greenwood with military precision. They had machine guns. They had dynamite. They had airplanes. Private planes dropped incendiary bombs on black homes and businesses. The first aerial bombing on American soil was against black Americans in Tulsa. 35 city blocks burned. 1,256 homes destroyed. 400 homes looted. 4 hotels. 8 churches. 7 grocery stores. 2 black hospitals. Doctors' offices. Lawyers' offices. Pharmacies. The school. Everything. Over 300 black people murdered. 10,000 left homeless. And then the cover-up began. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. Said it was a riot, not a covered event. The city changed building codes and fire regulations. Made it impossible for black residents to rebuild without expensive permits and materials they couldn't afford. Effectively, they were zoned out of their own neighborhood. Property records were destroyed. Without deeds, survivors couldn't prove ownership. The land was seized, sold, developed. Generations of wealth stolen. And here's the most shocking part. This massacre was removed from Oklahoma textbooks for 75 years. 3 generations of Oklahoma children, black and white, grew up never learning this happened. It was only in the 1990s, after the 75th anniversary, that Oklahoma finally acknowledged the truth. Dick Rowland, by the way, was never charged. Sarah Page refused to press charges. Later, evidence suggested nothing happened. But by then, 300 people were dead, and Black Wall Street was ashes. September 30th through October 1919, 4 years before Rosewood. Elaine, Arkansas was cotton country. Black sharecroppers did the work. White landowners took the profits. The sharecroppers were paid almost nothing, often fell into debt. The system was designed to keep them trapped in economic slavery. So black farmers organized. They formed a union, the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America. They planned to hire a lawyer, demand fair prices for their cotton, use collective bargaining to negotiate better terms. That was their crime. Organization, unity, demanding fair pay. White landowners panicked. If black sharecroppers could organize, if they could demand fair wages, if they could hire lawyers and fight back legally, the entire economic system would collapse. So they destroyed the union with violence. A white mob attacked a church where union members were meeting, killed several black farmers, then spread out across the county hunting for union members. Over the next 3 days, white mobs killed 100 to 200 black people. The exact number is unknown. Many bodies were thrown in the Mississippi River. Many were buried in unmarked graves. And here's where it gets worse. 600 United States Army soldiers were called in. Federal troops. You'd think the Army would protect black citizens from mob violence right now. The Army joined the mob. Soldiers participated in the killings, helped round up black people, helped terrorize the community. When it was over, 285 black people were arrested and charged with crimes. Not one white person was arrested. Not one white person charged. Not one soldier disciplined. The black prisoners were tortured into false confessions. 12 were sentenced to death. Only through the efforts of the NAACP and years of legal battles were these convictions eventually overturned. But the Union was destroyed. The organizing effort crushed. Black farmers learned the lesson. Don't organize. Don't demand fair wages. Don't challenge the system, or you'll be massacred. And how did newspapers describe it? The Elaine Race Riot. The Elaine Insurrection. As if black farmers defending themselves from mob violence were the aggressors. East St. Louis, Illinois, 1917. White workers feared black migrants from the South were taking their jobs. White mobs attacked black neighborhoods, killed 40 to 200 black people, burned hundreds of homes. Ocoee, Florida, 1920. July Perry, a black farmer, tried to vote, was turned away from the polls because of poll taxes and literacy tests designed to disenfranchise black voters. That night, a white mob burned the entire black community of Ocoee, killed dozens. Every black resident was permanently expelled. Ocoee remained an all-white town for decades. Springfield, Illinois, 1908. White mob attacked black neighborhoods, killed multiple people, destroyed black businesses. This massacre led to the founding of the NAACP because white liberals finally realized the violence was getting worse, not better. Atlanta, Georgia, 1906. White mobs killed 25 to 40 black people, destroyed black businesses, all based on false newspaper reports of black men attacking white women. Phoenix, South Carolina, 1898. White mob killed multiple black residents, destroyed property. all to suppress black political power. The list goes on, and on, and on. Dozens of towns, hundreds of massacres, thousands of deaths, millions of dollars in stolen wealth. Do you see it now? Let me make it crystal clear. Every single time black people built wealth, white mobs destroyed it. Every single time black people defended themselves, authorities called it a riot and blamed them. Every single time black people owned land, that land was stolen through violence or legal manipulation. This wasn't random. This wasn't isolated incidents. This was systematic ethnic cleansing. This was economic warfare. This was genocide. The method was always the same. Find an excuse, any excuse, a false accusation, a political victory, an economic threat. Then mobilize a mob, burn everything, kill anyone who resists, arrest the survivors, blame the victims, and erase it from history books. This was policy, not aberration. Policy. The purpose was to prevent black economic advancement, to prevent black political power, to prevent black independence, to maintain white supremacy through terror. And it worked. For generations, it worked. Because every black community knew what happened to Rosewood, Tulsa, Wilmington, Elaine. They learned the lesson. Don't get too successful. Don't challenge white authority. Don't defend yourselves, or you'll be erased. But here's what they didn't count on. They didn't count on survivors remembering. They didn't count on oral histories being passed down. They didn't count on researchers uncovering the truth. They didn't count on you learning this story right now. The truth is coming out. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you understand this history, you understand everything. The wealth gap, mass incarceration, police brutality, gentrification, reparations. It all connects back to this. They stole your inheritance. They burned your kingdoms. They erased your thrones. But they couldn't erase the truth forever. And now you know. Now let me show you something that will make your blood boil. Because destroying Rosewood wasn't enough. Destroying Tulsa wasn't enough. Destroying 50 black towns wasn't enough. They had to erase the evidence. They had to make sure nobody would ever know what they did. They had to rewrite history so their children and grandchildren would never feel guilty. So your children and grandchildren would never know what was stolen. They didn't just burn buildings. They burned truth. And they did it systematically, with precision, with government approval. Let me show you exactly how they covered up genocide in Tulsa after the mob finished killing and burning. They went after the records, property deeds, business licenses, birth certificates, marriage certificates, tax records, every document that proved black people owned that land. Burned. Gone. In Rosewood, they burned the church first. You know why? Because the African Methodist Episcopal Church kept the community records, births, deaths, marriages, baptisms, property transactions, everything that proved these families existed, that they owned, land, that they built wealth. All those records were stored in that church, and they burned it to the ground. In Wilmington, they destroyed the printing press of the Daily Record, the black newspaper. Why? Because that newspaper documented black success, black political power, black economic achievement. That documentation was dangerous. So they smashed the press, burned the building, made sure no one could ever read those archives. No records means no evidence. No evidence means no proof of ownership. No proof means you can't go to court and say this land was my grandfather's. You can't show a deed. You can't show a purchase agreement. You can't show anything. The paper trail is gone. And once the records were destroyed, local governments swooped in. They declared the land abandoned, said the owners fled and never came back, seized the property for unpaid taxes, sold it to white buyers for pennies on the dollar. Legal theft. Government-sanctioned theft. they also killed the witnesses. Sam Carter in Rosewood wasn't just killed because the mob was angry. He was killed because he had a horse and wagon. He could transport people. He could tell the story in other towns. He had mobility and connections. So they lynched him first. James Carrier was killed after he sought protection. Why torture him before killing him? To find out who else saw what happened. To find out who else might testify. To eliminate every potential witness. In Tulsa, many survivors were rounded up and held in internment camps for days. Not to protect them, to silence them, to make sure they couldn't organize, couldn't tell their story while it was still fresh, couldn't get lawyers involved immediately. Physical destruction wasn't just about buildings and bodies. It was about erasing the ability to prove anything happened at all. After the massacres came the legal cover-up. And this is where the system showed its true face. Because the law didn't punish the criminals. The law protected them. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. In Tulsa, thousands of black families lost everything. Their homes, their businesses, their possessions. They had insurance policies. They filed claims. And the insurance companies said no. Denied every claim. Used something called the riot exemption clause. Said that damage from riots isn't covered. So if a white mob burns your house down and the authorities call it a riot, you get nothing. Zero compensation. Imagine that. You pay premiums for years. You lose everything. And the insurance company says, sorry, riot damage doesn't count. You're financially destroyed twice. Once by the mob, once by the insurance company. In Tulsa, the city government changed the building codes immediately after the massacre. Suddenly, if you wanted to rebuild in Greenwood, you needed special permits. You had to use fireproof materials, brick instead of wood, steel instead of timber, expensive materials that people who just lost everything couldn't afford. So they couldn't rebuild. Their land sat empty. And eventually, the city seized it. Or white developers bought it for nothing. That's not recovery. That's systematic dispossession using legal mechanisms. And prosecutions, arrests. Justice, none. Zero. In Rosewood, between 200 and 300 white men participated in the massacre. Law enforcement knew their names, knew their faces. Some were prominent businessmen. Some were sawmill workers. Some were from out of town, but people saw them. Not one arrest, not one indictment, not one trial, not one conviction. In Tulsa, the same. Thousands of white rioters. Photographed, documented. Police participated. National Guard participated. Not one white person prosecuted for murder, arson, or theft. But in Elaine, Arkansas, remember what happened. 285 black people arrested, charged with murder and inciting violence, for defending themselves, for organizing a union, for demanding fair wages. 67 were convicted, 12 sentenced to death. They tortured confessions out of these men, threatened to lynch them if they didn't confess, then used those confessions in court. The legal system punished the victims and protected the perpetrators. That's not justice. That's tyranny. And it went higher than local courts. State governments were complicit. Florida didn't investigate Rosewood for 70 years. Didn't commission a report. Didn't interview survivors. Didn't acknowledge it happened. Just pretended an entire town vanished for no reason. Oklahoma didn't acknowledge Tulsa until 2001, 80 years later. The federal government knew. FBI knew. Congress knew. Newspapers reported on some of these massacres. But no federal intervention, no federal prosecutions, no enforcement of constitutional rights. Black citizens were being murdered by mobs, and the federal government did nothing. Jim Crow laws made it all legal. Black codes. Sundown town ordinances. Laws that said black people couldn't own property in certain areas, couldn't vote, couldn't testify against white people in court, couldn't serve on juries. The entire legal structure was designed to make black people legally inferior and deny them any recourse when white people committed violence against them. But physical and legal suppression wasn't enough. They needed to erase it from memory, from history, from education, so your children and grandchildren would never know. The Rosewood massacre was removed from Florida textbooks for 70 years. 70 years. From 1923 to 1993. 3 generations of Florida students, black and white, learned Florida history and never heard the word Rosewood. Teachers didn't teach it because it wasn't in the curriculum. It wasn't in the textbooks. And if a teacher tried to teach it anyway, they risked losing their job. The Tulsa Massacre was removed from Oklahoma textbooks for 75 years. Oklahoma students learned about Oklahoma history, the oil boom, the land rush statehood. But not about the time white mobs bombed Black Wall Street from airplanes. That part was deleted, erased, gone. Well, because if black children learned this history, they'd understand why they're poor. They'd understand their poverty isn't failure, it's theft. They'd demand reparations. They'd demand justice. They'd be angry, and anger leads to resistance. And if white children learned this history, they'd question the system. They'd ask uncomfortable questions. They'd realize their family's wealth might be connected to stolen black wealth. They'd feel guilty, and guilt might lead to supporting reparations, supporting change, supporting justice. So they erased it, made sure nobody learned it. They also changed the language. This is important. Language shapes perception. If you control the words, you control the narrative. So they stopped calling these events massacres, started calling them riots. The Tulsa Massacre became the Tulsa Race Riot. The Rosewood Massacre became the Rosewood Incident. The Wilmington Coup became the Wilmington Race Riot. Massacre implies victims and perpetrators, implies innocence and guilt, implies injustice. But riot implies both sides were fighting, implies chaos, implies maybe both sides were wrong. It shifts blame away from white mobs and onto black communities. Makes it sound like black people started it or were equally responsible. And it worked. For generations, Americans heard these events described as race riots and assumed black people were rioting, assumed black people were violent, never questioned it, never learned the truth. Teachers who tried to teach the real history faced consequences. In some states, even today, there are laws restricting how teachers can discuss race and history. They call it divisive. They say it makes white children feel bad. They ban books, ban curriculum, ban truth. Because truth is dangerous to systems built on lies. 3 generations of black children grew up not knowing their ancestors were millionaires, not knowing their ancestors owned land, not knowing their ancestors built thriving communities, not knowing their poverty was theft, not failure, not knowing they had a legal and moral right to reparations. That's generational amnesia. That's cultural genocide. That's how you destroy a people's identity and make them forget who they were. The media was complicit from the beginning. White newspapers didn't just report these massacres, they justified them. They created the narratives that made the violence seem reasonable, even necessary. When Fannie Taylor lied in Rosewood newspapers, ran headlines about a black beast attacking an innocent white woman. No investigation, no evidence, just the accusation printed as fact. They created the image of Jesse Hunter as a dangerous criminal rapist, made white readers feel that hunting him was righteous, made the massacre seem like justice instead of murder. In Tulsa newspapers, printed inflammatory articles before the massacre, articles about black crime, articles suggesting black men were threatening white women, articles designed to create fear and rage. Then when the massacre happened, Newspapers called it the Tulsa Race Riot. Blamed black residents for defending themselves. Said the black community started the violence. In Elaine, newspapers called it a Negro uprising. Said black farmers were planning to murder white landowners. Completely false. The farmers were organizing a union, but the newspapers created a narrative of black insurrection. Made it sound like white mobs were defending themselves against violent black radicals. Justified the massacre as self-defense. Notice the pattern. Newspapers created false narratives before, during, and after each massacre. They demonized black victims. They justified white violence. They blamed black communities for their own destruction. And then came the silence. Many newspapers stopped covering these events after the initial violence. Didn't follow up. Didn't count the dead. Didn't investigate. Didn't interview survivors. Just moved on to other stories. Let the massacres fade from public memory. Some newspapers didn't report the massacres at all, especially newspapers in other parts of the country. If it wasn't in the paper, most Americans never knew it happened. No national outrage, no federal intervention, just silence. And that silence continues today. Many sources still use the old language, still call them riots instead of massacres, still say people died instead of were murdered, still use passive voice to hide who did the killing. You'll see articles that say homes were burned instead of white mobs burned homes. That's not neutral reporting. That's covering up the truth. Even when the media finally started acknowledging these massacres in the 1990s and 2000s, the framing was often wrong. They'd call it a tragedy, a dark chapter, an unfortunate incident. Language that makes it sound like a natural disaster. Like nobody was responsible. Like it just happened somehow. But it didn't just happen. White mobs did it. White authorities allowed it. White media justified it. White legal systems protected the perpetrators. White educational systems erased it. That's not tragedy. That's conspiracy. That's systematic oppression. Now, before we go further, I need you to do something. If this truth has shocked you, if you never learned this in school, I need you to comment Rosewood below. Just that word, Rosewood. Let me know you're here. Let me know you're learning. Let me know this matters. And if you have family from Florida, from Levy County, from anywhere in the South, comment erased. Because your family's story was probably erased too. You might be descended from one of these 50 destroyed towns and never knew it. Hit that like button right now if you're done with the lies they taught in history class. If you're ready for truth, if you're ready to understand why things are the way they are today. Share this video with someone who thinks slavery was long ago. Share it with someone who asks why black people need reparations. Share it with someone who thinks the wealth gap is about hard work. They need to see this. They need to know. And stay with me. Because what I'm about to show you next will connect everything to right now. To your life today. To the struggles your family faces. To why you rent instead of own. To why the cops patrol your neighborhood differently. To why gentrification keeps pushing you out. It all connects back to this. And once you see the connection, you can't unsee it. This gets even more important. Don't go anywhere. You might be thinking this is history. This happened 100 years ago. What does this have to do with my life today, everything? It has everything to do with your life today. Let me show you exactly how Rosewood, Tulsa, Elaine, and 50 other massacres are still affecting you right now. Today, this moment. Here are the numbers. Pay attention because this will change how you see everything. The median white household in America has $188,000 in wealth. The median black household has $24,000. That's a gap of $164,000. That's not a small difference. That's a massive chasm. Now they'll tell you it's because black people don't work hard enough, don't save enough, Don't invest wisely. Make poor choices. That's the lie they tell. That's the lie they want you to believe. Because if you believe poverty is your fault, you won't demand what you're owed. But let me show you the real reason for the wealth gap. Let me show you the math, the actual stolen inheritance. Take Rosewood. 120 families owned land in 1923. Let's be conservative. Let's say the average family owned 1 acre. In 1923, that land was worth maybe $500 to $1,000 per acre. Not much, but it was theirs. Legal ownership, generational wealth starting to build. Today, land in Levy County, Florida, averages $50,000 to $150,000 per acre. Let's say $75,000 to be conservative. That 1 acre from 1923 is worth $75,000 today. Just the land. Not counting appreciation if they developed it. Not counting if they'd built more houses. Not counting if they'd started businesses. Just raw land value. But it's worse than that. Because wealth compounds. That 1 acre could have been used as collateral for a business loan in 1930. That business could have generated income. That income could have bought more property. That property could have been passed to children in 1960. Those children could have leveraged it for education, for more businesses, for real estate investment. By now, 4 generations later, that 1 acre from 1923 could easily be worth $500,000 to $2 million in total family wealth. Multiply that by 120 families in Rosewood alone. That's $60 million to $240 million in stolen wealth from one small town. Now do Tulsa. 1,256 homes destroyed. Average home value at the time was probably $5,000 to $15,000. But these weren't just homes. These were businesses, banks, hotels, theaters, hospitals. Some estimates put the total property destruction at $32 million in 1921 money. That's over $500 million in today's dollars. But again, it's not just about property value. It's about generational compounding. Those Tulsa families would be billionaires today if their wealth had been allowed to grow for a century. Multiply across 50 destroyed black towns. Conservative estimate of total stolen wealth, over $100 trillion. 100 trillion. That's not a typo. That's the actual economic impact when you account for generational wealth building over a century. This isn't ancient history. This is why your grandmother cleaned white people's houses while owning no house of her own. This is why your family rents while white families own. This is why you work 2 jobs while white peers with less education have inherited wealth. It's not because they're smarter. It's not because they work harder. It's because their great-grandparents didn't have their wealth burned to the ground. It's because their great-grandparents weren't massacred for being successful. The wealth gap is not a failure gap. The wealth gap is a theft gap. They stole your inheritance, and they never paid it back. Now let's talk about reparations, because every time this conversation comes up, someone says it was too long ago. Says we should just move on. Says nobody alive today owned slaves. But Rosewood wasn't slavery. Rosewood was 1923, 102 years ago. Your grandmother's lifetime. Your great-grandparents could have lived there. Some survivors of these massacres lived into the 2000s. This isn't ancient history. This is recent history. Tulsa was 1921. Survivors gave testimony in the 1990s and 2000s. People who hid under beds while mobs firebombed their homes. People who watched their parents murdered. Still alive? Still waiting for justice. Redlining didn't end until 1968, 57 years ago. Your parents' lifetime. Banks refusing to give mortgages to black families. Government-backed discrimination. Legal economic exclusion. That's not ancient history. That's your parents' generation. The theft isn't historical. The theft is ongoing. Every day you pay rent instead of building equity. Every day you can't get a business loan because you have no collateral, because your grandparents' land was stolen. Every day you work for wages, while others live off inherited wealth. That's ongoing theft. The theft compounds every single day. But here's what gives me hope. Here's what proves reparations are possible. In 1994, Florida passed the Rosewood Compensation Law, House Bill 591, the first reparations law in American history. Let me tell you what it did. It gave $150,000 to each survivor who could prove they owned property or lived in Rosewood during the massacre. It established a $500,000 fund to reimburse property losses. It created a $100,000 per year scholarship fund for descendants of Rosewood families. Florida admitted what happened. Florida acknowledged the harm. Florida paid compensation. In 1994, 71 years late, but they did it. If Florida can do it for Rosewood, we can do it for Tulsa, for Elaine, for Wilmington, for all 50 destroyed towns, for all the families affected, for all the descendants still living with the economic consequences of that theft. Rosewood law proves reparations aren't impossible. It proves states can acknowledge historical harm and compensate victims. It sets legal precedent. It shows the way forward. Every destroyed town represents thousands of families. Every family represents generations of stolen wealth. The debt is real. The debt is calculable. The debt is owed. And when someone tells you reparations are too expensive, remind them that America paid Germany and Japan billions in reconstruction after World War II. Remind them that America paid Japanese Americans reparations for internment camps. Remind them that America bailed out banks for trillions in 2008. The money exists. The question is whether there's the moral will to pay what's owed. Reparations aren't charity. Reparations aren't handouts. Reparations are payment for theft. When someone steals from you and gets caught, they don't get to say, "Sorry, let's just move on." No, they pay restitution. They return what was stolen plus damages. That's basic justice. That's what we're demanding. Not sympathy, not guilt. Justice. And here's what they don't want you to see. The theft didn't stop in 1923. The pattern continues. They just changed the methods, updated the tactics, made it look legal. But it's the same game. Gentrification is modern land theft. When they raise your rent and force you out of neighborhoods your grandparents built, that's Rosewood 2.0. When they call it revitalization and development, but somehow black people can't afford to stay, that's systematic removal. Same goal, different method. They want the land. They don't want you on it. Mass incarceration is modern slavery. After the Elaine massacre, they arrested 285 black people and 0 white people. Today, black people are 13% of the population, but 40% of the prison population. Arrested for the same crimes white people commit, but don't get arrested for. Sentenced longer for the same offenses. Used as prison labor for pennies per hour. Slavery didn't end. They just renamed it, called it the criminal justice system. But it's the same forced labor. Same exploitation. Same dehumanization. Police brutality is the modern KKK. In Rosewood, law enforcement stood by and watched Sam Carter get lynched. Did nothing. In Tulsa, police joined the white mob, shot black residents, burned black homes. Today, police kill unarmed black people and claim self-defense, claim they feared for their lives, rarely get convicted, rarely face consequences. The badge changed. The uniform changed. But the violence is the same. The impunity is the same. The message is the same. Your life doesn't matter. Your safety doesn't matter. We can kill you without consequence. History doesn't repeat. It rhymes. The lyrics change slightly. the melody stays the same. They wanted your land in 1923. They burned you out. They want your land in 2025. They price you out. Different tactics, same theft. They wanted your labor in 1919. They forced you into sharecropping. They want your labor in 2025. They force you into low-wage jobs and prison labor. Different names, same exploitation. They terrorized you with lynch mobs in 1921. They terrorize you with police violence in 2025. Different uniforms, same violence. The system hasn't changed. It's just adapted, evolved, found new ways to do old things. And if you don't know the history, you can't see the pattern. That's why they erased it from textbooks. That's why they don't want you to know about Rosewood. Because once you know, you see it everywhere. You can't unsee it. Let me make this personal. If your family lived in Rosewood, this affected you. If your family lived in Tulsa, this affected you. If your family lived in any southern state during Jim Crow, this affected you. Even if they weren't in one of the 50 destroyed towns, they lived under the threat of being next. They couldn't build wealth, because building wealth made you a target. This is why your grandmother worked herself to exhaustion and still struggled. Not because she wasn't capable. Because her mother's wealth was burned to the ground. Because her father's land was stolen. Because her family's businesses were destroyed. Because every time black people built something, they tore it down. This is why your family rents instead of owns. Because your great-grandfather's property deed was burned with the church. Because without proof of ownership, the land was seized. Because without land for collateral, you can't get loans. Because without loans, you can't buy property. Because without property, you can't build wealth. 4 generations later, you're still dealing with the consequences of theft from 1923. This is your stolen inheritance. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, literal. Land, homes, businesses, wealth, stolen, burned, seized, erased, and never repaid. You have a right to be angry. You have a right to demand justice. You have a right to demand what was stolen be returned with interest. Because this isn't ancient history. This is your life. This is your family. This is your stolen future. And now you know. Now you understand. Now you see the pattern. Now you know why things are the way they are. Not because you failed, because they stole from you. And it's time to demand they pay it back.